Hey everybody, and welcome back. I thought I would do another chapter today. As you know, we are trying to get the last little bit done of these chapters, the last 4 chapters, before I head back to work at the end of the week. So, we are going to be working on McCaffrey's Dragonsinger again today. Actually, I'm surprised I'm not able to do any recording today. It was supposed to be that we were having we're supposed to be having fire alarm testing in the building right now, but the pretty much everything has been put on hold because we are having a bad weather day. We've probably gotten, well, it's about 20 centimeters, so let me look that up. 22 inches. So about almost 8 inches of snow since about midnight last night. I know it's not a lot of snow, but the city doesn't really see it all that often. So it's, well, A, it's really, really pretty. But B, people on the roads are kind of dangerous. So, no fire alarms going off randomly, nobody poking their head in my door to test the 2 that are right above my apartment, right above my front door. So, yeah. Because normally by now they would be done with the building. Guess it takes like a minute per apartment. But it's nice. It lets me know that it gives me an extra day to do some recording. So I'm sure you see the back of my chair has changed. It is the same chair, just new blanket. I change it up every once in a while. This one's warmer, fuzzier, good for cold weather. And, oh, Miss Skitter is sleeping right now. We may not see her this chapter. I've already gone over and pestered her. She gave me a dirty look and went to sleep. And Diamond is nowhere to be found. I can think of about 4 or 5 places that she is probably hiding, because she does have her own personal hidey holes in here. And we don't take them away, because cats need that opportunity to just sort of hide themselves for a little bit. Oh, and speak of the devil and she may appear. Miss Diamond has awoken. No, Miss Skitter has awoken. But she's not coming to me. She went off to the food dish. I just heard sounds of a cat moving, and I looked over and I'm like, oh wow, she's actually moving. So, since it's a miserable day outside, my ankle is getting better, but it doesn't like this kind of weather at all. I don't either. It's hard to walk around in, and my wheels get stuck in the snow. So yeah, we're gonna have a pretty good day, I think. But I should get started. We have got a not so long chapter this time. It's about 10 pages less than the previous 2. Actually, it's a little, probably about the 10 pages less than chapter 6. Chapters 9 and 10 are both in the 30-page range, so around somewhere between chapter 6 and chapter 7 for length. And then chapter 11 is actually only about 10 pages long, so it's really tiny. That'll probably take about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes. So we're just getting on. Oh, and look. Yay! My hair's not driving me crazy. And Skitter's sounding off in the background. So let's get started and we'll enjoy a good book. Chapter 8. Gather, gather, it's a gather day. No work for us, and threads away. Stalls are building, squares swept clear. Gather all from far and near. Bring your marks and bring your wares. Bring your family for theirs. Food and drink and fun and song. The whole flag flies to gather along. What's wrong with the hold? Melanie asked Pimer the next morning as she, the boy, and Camo were feeding the fire lizards. Pimer kept craning his neck past the roofs of the Harper Hall to see the fire heights of Fort Hold. Nothing's wrong. I just want to see if the gather flag's up. Gather flag? Melanie recalled that Sibyl had mentioned a gather. Sure, it's spring and sunny. It's a rest day. Thread's not due, so there ought to be a gather. Pimer regarded her a long moment. Then his face screwed up into an incredulous expression. You mean you don't have gathers? Half Circle is isolated, Melanie replied defensively. And with thread falling... Yeah, I forgot that. No wonder you're such a smashing musician, he said, shaking his head as if this were no real compensation. Nothing to do but practice. Still, he added in a somewhat skeptical. You must have had gathers before thread started. Of course we did. Traders came through the marshes 3 and 4 times a turn. Pimer was unimpressed. Melanie realized that she herself had only the vaguest memories of such events. Threadfall had started when she was barely 8 turns old. We have gathers as often as it's sunny on a rest day, Pimer said, chattering away. And there isn't any thread due. Of course, our being a hold with several small craft halls, as well as the main Harper Craft Hall, does make for great gathers. You don't happen, and he cocked his head slyly, to have any marks on you. Marks? Pimer was thoroughly disgusted with her obtuseness. Marks! Marks! What you get in exchange for what you're selling at a gather. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 4 small white pieces of highly polished wood, on which were the numerals 32, had been incised on one side, and on the other the mark of the Smithcraft. Only 30 seconds, but with the 4 I got an 8th and a Smithcraft at that. Melanie had never actually seen marks before. All trading transactions had been carried out by her father, the seaholder. She was astonished that so young a boy as Pimer had possession of marks, and said so. Oh, I sang, you know, even before I got apprenticed. I'd always get a mark of some amount or another. My foster mother kept them for me until I came here. Pimer wrinkled his nose in disgust. But you don't get paid for singing at gathers if you're a harper. And you have to do your own turn anyway. I haven't anything to give the marksman here. I keep trying, but Master Geraint won't put his seal on my pipes. So I have to figure out other ways of turning the odd. Hey, look, Melanie! And he grabbed her arm. There goes the flag! There'll be a gather! He went flying across the court as fast as he could to the apprentice dormitory. On the top of the Fort Hold Fire Heights, Melanie now saw the bright yellow pennant, and flapping below it on the mast, the red and black barred streamer that apparently signaled a gather. She heard Pimer's cries echoing in the apprentice dormitory and the sounds of sleepers stirring in complaint. As if Pimer's sighting of the pennant had been a signal, the drudges, hurried by Albuna and Sylvina, entered the kitchen. The flag and pennant on the hold mast were duly noted, and the meal preparations were conducted in a cheerful humor. Melanie dispersed her fare to their sunning and bathing, and finding Sylvina and Albuna offered to take breakfast to the harper and his bronze, whom he'd named Zare. I told you, Albuna, that with Melanie to help, 2 more fire lizards would be no problem, Sylvina said, pushing the kitchen woman into some other task as she smiled warmly at Melanie. Not that the harper will be here much with his, nor Sibyl either. She called to Albuna, who was off grumbling to herself. Long as she's lived in the Harper Hall, you'd think she'd be used to change about. Melanie wanted to ask Sylvina about the girls and their gossiping, but Sylvina was avoiding her eye. Just then, they both heard Melanie's name being called in a frantic voice. Sibyl came crashing down the kitchen steps, holding his trousers with one bare arm, wincing at the clutch of his fire lizard queen on the other. Kimmy was creeling wildly about hunger. Melanie, there you are. I've been searching everywhere. What's the matter with her? Ouch! Sibyl was wide-eyed with anxiety. She's only hungry. Only hungry? Here, come with me. And Melanie took Sibyl by the arm, picked up the tray she'd been preparing for the master harper, and pulled the journeyman out of the kitchen to spare him Abuna's black scowl, and into the relative peace of the dining hall. Now feed her. I can't. My pants. Sibyl nodded to his trousers, which were beltless, threatening to slip off his hips. Stifling a giggle, Melanie unbuckled her own worn belt and secured Sibyl's pants for him. He'd grabbed a handful of meat and held it out for Kimmy. The ungrateful little wench hissed and lunged at the meat, digging her claws into his forearm. Well, Melanie couldn't give him her tunic too. She spotted a scrap of toweling by the service hatch. Deftly, she disentangled the queen's legs from Siebel's forearm and wrapped the cloth about his scratched and bleeding arm, then managed to redeposit Kimmy before the queen was aware of being shifted. "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you," sighed Siebel, sinking into the nearest bench. "And you had 9 of these creatures to feed every day." He gave her a look of renewed respect. "I don't know how you did it. I really don't." Melanie pointed to his claw as she took up a handful of meat. Kimmy didn't care whose hand held the meat, so Siebel gratefully gulped some claw. "Melanie!" Another voice roared from the top of the stairs. "Sir?" Melanie dashed to the foot of the steps. "He's making the most outlandish noises," the harper yelled. "Is he hurt or just hungry? His eyes are flaming red." "Here you are," said Sylvina, appearing from the kitchen with a second tray of food for the human and fire lizard. "I thought we'd be hearing from him once Siebel arrived." Melanie could not keep from laughing with Sylvina. She took the steps 2 at a time without spilling so much as a drop of the claw or tumbling a glob of meat from the piled bowl. The harper had taken time to dress, and he thought to wrap his arm against the needle-sharp claws of his little bronze. But he looked not a whit less harried or distressed than Siebel. "You're sure it's only hunger?" asked Master Robington, but his fire lizard's creeling abated with the first mouthful of meat. Robington gestured Melanie towards his quarters, but the fire lizard, believing the food was being withdrawn, let out an indignant shriek and swatted at Melanie's hand. "Here, here, eat, you greedy thing," said the harper with great affection in his voice. "Just don't wake everyone. It's rest day." "Too late," remarked Dominic in an acid tone of voice. His sleeping rug pulled around him as he stood in the doorway of his room. "Between you howling like an injured dragon, Siebel sounding like a flight of them, and these pesky beasts of tones that could bend metal, no one's going to enjoy a rest day." "The gather flag is flying," said the harper in a consolatory way. He continued to feed Zare as he and Melanie proceeded to his room. "A gather, that's all I need." Dominic slammed his door. "I trust there won't be a repetition of this," said Master Marshall as the harper and Melanie came abreast of his room. He wore a loose robe, but he obviously had been drawn from his bed by the creeling and shouts. His sour gaze was directed fully on Melanie, as if she were the sole cause of this commotion. "Probably," the harper replied cheerfully, "until I figure out this precious creature's habits. He only hatched yesterday, Marshall. Do give him a few days' grace." Marshall sputtered something, glaring balefully and accusingly at Melanie, and then shut his door, pointedly, without slamming it. Melanie all too clearly heard the other doors closing along the corridor, and she was very grateful to be in the harper's company. "Don't let old Marshall upset you, Melanie," said Master Robington in a quiet voice. Melanie looked up quickly, gratefully for his reassurance. He smiled again as he nodded for her to enter his room and gestured for her to set the tray down on the center of the sand table. "Fortunately," he went on, slouching in a chair, all the while supplying meat bits for Zare, "you don't have to sit classes with Marshall." "I don't?" Robington chuckled at the note of relief in her voice, and then laughed again as Zare missed a morsel, creeled anxiously until the harper had retrieved it from the floor and deposited it neatly in the open mouth. "No, you don't. Marshall teaches only at the apprentice level." The master harper sighed. "He really is adept at drilling basic theory into rebellious apprentice minds. But Pederon already taught you more than Marshall knows." Relieved Melanie? "Oh, yes. Master Marshall doesn't seem to like me." "Master Marshall has always considered it a waste of time and effort to teach any girls. What good would it do them?" Melanie blinked, surprised to hear her father's opinion echoed in the Harper Hall. Then she realized that Master Robington had been speaking in a deft mimicry of Master Marshall's testy manner. Warm fingers caught her chin, and she was made to look up at the harper. The lines of fatigue and worry were plainly visible, despite his good night's rest. Marshall's dislike of the feminine sex is a standing joke in this hall, Melanie. Give him the courtesy due his rank and age, and ignore his biased thinking. As I said, you don't have to sit classes with him. Not that Dominic will be any easier to study with. He's a hard taskmaster. But Dominic will take over your tuition where Pederon left off in musical form and composition until I can. Unfortunately, and the harper's smile of regret was sincere, I am badly pressed for time with all that's happening, much though I would prefer to undertake the task myself. Still, Dominic's understanding of the truly classical form is superior, and he's keen to monopolize any instrumentalist capable of playing his intricate music. Don't miss your lessons with Master Shanagar, for you must be able to sing your songs effectively effectively. But, and he lifted a warning finger, don't fall for Brudigan's importunisms about fire lizard courses. That can be scheduled for a later time when we've settled you properly in your craft. I'd like you to concentrate on your instruments as far and as fast as that hand of yours permits. How is it healing, by the way? And he reached for her left hand. You've done too much by the look of those splits. Does it hurt? I won't have you crippling yourself in your zeal, Melanie. Understand that? Melanie, sensing his kind concern, swallowed against the lump in her throat and managed a tentative smile. It's never easy, sweet child, to have a real gift. Something else is withheld to compensate. Melanie was startled at the sadness that his melancholy in his eyes and face, and he went on, almost to himself. If you won't surrender the mark, you'll never be more than half alive. Speaking of marks, and his expression altered completely. He leaned forward across the sand table, rummaging in the compartments of the central bridge built above the actual sand level. Ah, here. And he pressed something in her hand. There's a gather today, and you deserve some relaxation. I suspect diversions were few and infrequent in your sea-hold. Find something pretty to wear at the stalls. A belt, perhaps. And buy some of the bubbly pies. Pimer will lead you to them, the scamp. But tomorrow, and Master Robington waggled his finger at her, back to work for you. Siebel says you make a good copyist. Did you have a chance to polish the Brecky song yesterday evening? I think you'll agree the melodic line falters on the fourth phrase. And he hummed it. Then I want you to rewrite the ballad observing all the traditional musical forms. Think of it as an exercise in musical theory. Mind you, I'm of the opinion that the strength of your work will lie in a looser, less formalized style. There are, however, purists in the craft who must be mollified while you're an apprentice. There, his belly swollen so that the individual lumps of meat could be discerned against his skin, gave a sudden burp and collapsed into sleep in the crook of the harper's arm. I say, Melanie, how long will he do nothing but eat and sleep? The harper sounded disappointed. The first 7 days, maybe a few days longer, Melanie answered, still trying to assimilate the astonishing instructions and philosophy. He'll develop a personality in a very short time. That's a relief. The harper heaved an exaggerated sigh. I'd been worrying that perhaps his brains had gotten addled. going between so much time in the egg. Not that I'd care for him any less. And he smiled tenderly down at the sprawled form. How did you ever manage to fill 9 raspulous bellies? Now his smile was all for her. And what a relief to have you here to help us. In this, I am your apprentice. His eyes held hers a moment longer, still twinkling with amusement, although his face settled into a serious expression. In all other matters, you are to consider yourself my apprentice, you know. Now, you may take the tray back to the kitchen, and you are dismissed to the gather. Unless, of course, he added with that winning smile, something untoward happens to this fellow. She brought the tray and empty dishes to the kitchen, where Abuna, with more than her usual courtesy, suggested that Melanie had better get some breakfast before it was all gone. They'd be clearing the table soon, and if the lazybones hadn't eaten, too bad. Not by what they couldn't stuff themselves at the gather stalls. That reminded Melanie of the mark the harper had put in her hand. At first she thought it was a dim light of the passage, but when she got to the entrance hall, she could plainly see that the 2 was underscored. It wasn't a half mark, at which would have been scored above. She clenched the precious piece in her fist, amazed. The master harper had given her a whole 2-mark piece to spend on herself. 2 whole marks. Why, she could buy anything. No, he'd said that she was to buy something pretty to wear. A belt. The harper's keen eye had noticed the absence of hers. And it was a worn belt, anyhow. But a new one, instead of one handed down? A belt she could choose for herself? How very kind of Master Robbington. And he'd said she was to buy bubbly pies. She looked about the scattering of boys at the apprentice tables for Pimer's curly head of hair. He was, as usual, deep in conversation with several boys, and probably planning mischief to judge by the closeness of all the heads. There were no masters at the circular table, and just a few journeymen at the oval ones, clustered about Sibyl, admiring Kimi, asleep in his arms. She couldn't give 'em away if she wanted to, Pimer was saying in a strident tone as Melanie approached his group. Someone must have jabbed him in the ribs, because he glanced over his shoulder, and, while he looked in no way abashed, it was obvious from the expression of the others that Melanie had been the she he'd meant. "Can you?" he asked bluntly. "Can I what?" "Give anyone else one of your fire lizards?" "No." "See, I told you." Pimer pointed an accusing finger at Ranley. So Siebel couldn't have given Robington the queen, could he, Melanie? But the master harper should have had the queen, said Ranley, rebellious and unconvinced. Siebel did offer the queen to Master Robington when she hatched, Melanie said quickly, but it was too late. Impression had occurred, and that can't be altered. Well, just how did Siebel get his hands on the queen egg? Now Ranley's eyes hotly accused her of complicity. Completely by accident, she said, mastering her irritation at such an outrageous suggestion. First, there isn't really any positive way of knowing which is the queen egg in a fire lizard clutch. Second, it isn't anyone's business but Master Robington's and Siebel's. She'd just lay this diverse rumor into an early grave and repay a little of her great debt to both men. Third, I picked the two biggest eggs to get in the clutch for Master Robington, and the boys nodded with approval. But they could have both been bronzes. Then she laughed. It all happened so fast when the eggs started to hatch. No one bothered to see which pot was whose. Master Robington and Siebel just grabbed because both pots were rocking fits to fall. The little bronze hatched first, right into Master Robington's hands. And that was that. Right then, he caught it just before it could fall from the hearthstone. The boys snatched in a breath for that near catastrophe. And then there was Siebel with the queen in his hands. Then he tried to give her to the harper. But Zare had impressed, and so had little Kimmy. There's no way to change that. And I don't want to hear another word from any of you as to who got what and who shouldn't have. There's enough gossip flying about this hall. She wished she could forget her worries about what those girls had told the Lord Holder. I kept trying to tell them, said Pimer, throwing his hands out, his eyes bright with injured innocence because Melanie was now glaring at him. Then he clutched dramatically at his throat because his voice had squeaked on the last word. I've gone hoarse talking. Can't have that golden throat horse, can we? Said Ranley sarcastically. Pimer was testing claw pots on the table to see if there were any of them that were still warm. Finding one, he poured 2 mugs, offering one to Melanie. He gurgled as he downed a half mug, rubbed his hand across his mouth, and then told her that she'd better eat quickly because they'd be clearing any minute. Now let's get back to the mark problem. This will only be the second gather of the turn, so I figure they'll be sending an older journeyman from the Smithcraft Hall to keep an eye on the younger fellows and supervise the bargaining. And that journeyman is just likely to be my father's friend Pergamol. And if it's Pergamol, then I can guarantee that you'll get top marks for your work. And he held up a silencing hand as Ranley opened his mouth to comment, if it isn't Permagol, it'll be someone who knows him. And if it's just a young journeyman who's on to you, Pimer, Ranley asked in a caustic voice, then I blubber. Pimer dismissed this problem with all the disdain of a practiced dissembler. I'm just a little feller, and I never have much, and Great tears welled up in his eyes, and his face was a mask of trusting and anxious innocence. If I may disturb this tactical meeting, said a different voice, and all the boys looked guiltily around to see Sibyl, fire lizard cradled in his arm, for a few words with Melanie. She rose and followed the journeyman to the window. He pressed her rolled-up belt in her hand as he thanked her for saving his dignity that morning. Now, can I keep Kimmy with me all the time? He asked, lightly stroking the fire lizard's folded wings. Even in her sleep, she responded to his touch with a sigh. The more she's with you, the stronger the bond will grow. If not on you, near you. Is she too young to be taught to sit on my shoulder like your beauty does? I've got to have both hands for a while today. When she wakes, put her on your shoulder, Melanie grinned, and get used to having your neck throttled. How often does she eat? She'll let you know. Melanie laughed at Sibyl's consternation. At least you don't have to go catch it. Keep a few meat rolls in your belt pouch, although I'm sure Camo will always be ready to chop for you any time. Sibyl chuckled too. One thing you'll need to do daily is oil her skin. Does it have to stink like the stuff you use? Sibyl was dismayed. Melanie suppressed a giggle. Master Oldive had that oil on hand. He said he makes it for the ladies of the hold to use on their faces. Oh no. But I'm sure he'll make you something more suitable for your... She paused, not certain just how much she could tease Sibyl. My male dignity and rank? Sibyl grinned at her. I'll just have a word with him now, and he strolled off with a lit in his step. Melanie was very pleased that she had suppressed the boys' misapprehension over the fire lizard's hatching. Sibyl was so nice, and it wasn't as if Master Robbington had been upset at impressing the bronze. He genuinely hadn't cared a whit once Zare had impressed and was his very own. And if Master Robbington was content, the rest of the hall shouldn't quarrel. Then she worried about the girls' gossip. If the apprentices could take a simple switch like the hatching and derive deep insult from it, what had the girls done with her reputation at the hold? Look, Melanie, Pimer said, popping up beside her. I got a couple of things to do now, But after dinner, you want me to take you round the gather? Seeing as you haven't been to one, here that is." She readily agreed, curious to see just how his plans would affect his bargaining. He darted out of the hall then, the other boys hard on his heels. A few journeymen still lounged at the oval table, drinking claw, but most of the apprentices had dispersed. At the round table, Master Marshall now glowered darkly at her as he ate in solitary dignity. Melanie left the dining hall for the sanctuary of her room. Her fire lizards were curled up on the deep window ledge, their wings glinting brilliantly in the sun, but their jeweled eyes closed behind their several lids. Beauty stirred, raised her head, parted the outer lid, squeaked softly, and when Melanie stroked her reassuringly, sighed and returned to her interrupted nap. From the vantage point of the second level, Melanie could see the square beyond the Harper Hall and the broad roadway. There was already considerable activity. Burden beasts moving up the river road, their slow, long stride, one of indolence rather than labor under heavy weight. Stalls were being assembled, forming a loose square about an open space. Tables and benches were already in place, facing the dance square. For dancing, there would surely be, with 100 or more harpers to do the playing. There'd be more dancing than she'd ever seen, and probably different dances from the ones popular in her sea-hold. Oh, this would be a grand gather. Her first here, and her first since thread started falling. Melanie caught sight of the girls emerging from the cot, brightly clad with filmy scarves to protect their hair from the light wind. Oh, what she'd like to do with their hair. Pona's hair with its long, neat plaits to be pulled out by the roots. Melanie stopped her thoughts, a little appalled at the intensity of her dislike. After all, the girls had failed in their aim to prejudice Lord Garrosh against her. Why was she bothering her head about them? She'd better things to occupy herself with. She was an apprentice harper, not a sometime student. She was Master Harper Robbington's apprentice. Of course, since he was the Master Harper of this hall, everyone within was his apprentice. But she was an apprentice, and she intended to remain one, more than ever now that the girls had made an effort to jeopardize her tenure. She was going to stay, despite them and her parents. She was going to make her place here because this was where she belonged. As Master Robbington had said, here was where she could perfect her music. She she could make her own place for herself, not slip into a spot left by anyone else, just as she'd made the cave her own. She would make her own place here in the Harper Hall, and no one, particularly a sneaky little twitterhead whose only claim to importance was being someone's granddaughter, was going to dislodge her. Or a conniving coward like the cotholder Dunca. Melanie wondered if Sylvina had done anything about settling the rumors. Really, it just wasn't important, and Melanie told herself sternly, particularly when Lord Garrosh seemed to approve of her and actually suggested that she help him train his queen, Murga. Melanie laughed at herself. Just wait till those sissies heard about that. She, apprentice trainer of fire lizards, the only successful one on Pern. The teacher just one step ahead of the student. She giggled now, covering her mouth with her hands, because she knew she was acting the wary. But she'd been silly not to see before that she had several tunes to play in this Harper Hall. The tunes she made, her fire lizards, yes, and how to gut fish and trim sail whenever some harper needed to know. And why did Sibyl need to know? She sighed gustfully. Too bad about those girls, though. She wished Odiva didn't have to stay with them. She was above the general sort at the cot, and it would have been nice to have a girl friend. Not that she didn't have a good friend in Pimer. When Pimer grew up and lost his brilliant voice, would he have to leave the craft hall? No, because they must surely be training him to play one of those other tunes. She didn't quite see him stepping into Master Shawnagar's slippers. She rose from the window ledge, reminded of the task that Master Robbington had set her as his apprentice. She tuned her guitar and began to rehearse the Brecky song, softly, lest the harper was busy in his rooms. Did he honestly think that song, a twiddle to while the time away until Sibyl returned, was good enough to be perfected? Of their own violation, her fingers were plucking out the melody. She found herself caught up once more in the progeny of Brecky's anguished command. Don't leave me alone. She played the song through, agreeing with the harper that the fourth phrase needed polishing. Ah, yes, if she dropped to the fifth, it would intensify the phrase and complement the chord. The tocsin rang for mealtime finally, and shouts and laughter broke her concentration. She was almost angry with the disruption, but with a renewed awareness of her surroundings she realized how her hand ached. Her back and neck muscles were stiff from crouching over the guitar. She'd no idea she'd been practicing that long. But the song was set in her head and her fingers now. She would have it finished in next to no time once she had more ink in those paper sheets. She changed into the clothes she wanted to wear to the gather, not as rich as the girls would be wearing, but new. The close woven trousers and the contrasting colored tunic with the sleeveless hide jumper displaying the apprentice badge meant more to her than fine cloth and filmy scarves. As she pulled on her slippers, she noticed that the constant scuffling on the stone floors was wearing the soles and toes out. At least here, she didn't need fear to approach Sylvina, and perhaps her feet were healed enough for proper boots, which would last longer. And that, my dear friends, is the end of chapter 8. That means we have 3 more to go and a lot of things to be resolved. But, of course, we all know what's coming. I love this book. I really do. I know I've said this 1,000 times, and I will probably say it 1,000,000 more. This entire series just gripped me. But these books were what I was introduced to. Dragon Song, Dragonsinger. Not so much Dragon Drums, but I knew it was there. I should take my hand out from in front of the camera. I really do enjoy it. I always have. I always will. I still read them every couple of years, just because I do. I love to read. And this is my getting a chance to read them and share my enjoyment. Ugh. You know what? These ones, they work, but I don't really like the look of them on my face. Yeah, oh well. They work. That's all that matters. So we've got 3 chapters left. 2 really long ones, 1 really short one. And then we start on Dragon Drums. And I have warned you, and I'll warn you again, there is going to be a chapter that I am going to have to break up into 2 parts. Because it is just way too long. This, I think, we're about an hour in. Once I've edited, it's probably going to be about 55 minutes. It's not going to be a huge post today, not like the 2 hour and 7 minute one that you guys saw 4 days ago. But hey, we don't want to give you too much. So, I want to thank you guys for being here. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. You have no idea how much I appreciate that you have sat through and listened to me read. I hope you all have a great morning, afternoon, evening, whatever it is for you. And please like, comment, and if you really feel like you want to, subscribe. But even if you don't do any of that, just know that I really appreciate you and thank you for coming and listening. Have a great day. Bye-bye.